The date is May 31st, 1985. A man sits alone in his mansion, staring at the wall, realizing the company he built from a garage has just stripped him of all power. He isn't just fired, he is erased. But to understand how the world's greatest visionary was betrayed by the very man he hired, we have to rewind 2 years to a single question about sugar water. What if I told you that the most dangerous place in the business world isn't the stock market floor, but the private boardroom table? You might think CEOs are untouchable kings of their domains, but history proves otherwise. Some of the most famous companies in the world, Apple, Twitter, Uber, were forged in the fires of betrayal, secret alliances, and brutal power grabs. You are about to discover the ruthless mechanics of the boardroom coup. These are the moments where friendships end, billions are lost, and the course of history changes over a single vote. From the classic betrayals of the 80s to the chaotic firing of Sam Altman, here are the stories corporate PR teams tried to bury. Let's start with the grandfather of all corporate betrayals. You know the name Steve Jobs, and you know the name Apple. But the story you've been told about his departure is often simplified. It wasn't just a disagreement, it was a Greek tragedy played out in Silicon Valley. It began with a seduction. In 1983, Jobs needed a CEO to help Apple grow. He set his sights on John Sculley, the head of Pepsi. Jobs famously asked him, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world?" Sculley chose the latter. It was a match made in heaven, until the Macintosh launch began to falter. By 1985, the atmosphere inside Apple was toxic. Jobs was brilliant but volatile, driving his team to burnout. Sculley, the professional manager, saw Jobs as a liability to the company's stability. The board, comprised of older, conservative investors, began to whisper. They sided with Sculley. The climax happened on May 24th. Jobs, sensing the walls closing in, attempted to stage a coup of his own to oust Sculley while the CEO was away on a business trip in China. But there was a leak. Jean-Louis Gasset, a French executive Jobs trusted, informed Sculley of the plot. Sculley canceled his trip, stormed into the boardroom the next morning, and demanded a vote. It was him or Steve. The board didn't hesitate. They chose Sculley. Jobs was stripped of his operational duties. He was a general without an army. He resigned shortly after, selling all but one of his Apple shares. It would take 12 years and a near bankruptcy for Apple to realize they had exiled the only man who could save them. But sometimes the coup isn't loud. Sometimes it happens in silence, among friends who founded a company together. This brings us to the messy, tangled history of Twitter. You probably associate Jack Dorsey with Twitter, but you might not know that he was kicked out of his own company long before he returned to save it. In 2008, Twitter was growing, but it was crashing constantly. The fail whale error screen was more famous than the tweets themselves. Jack Dorsey, the CEO, was seen by his co-founders as distracted, leaving work early to take fashion design classes and yoga. His co-founder, Evan Williams, saw an opening. Williams didn't stage a dramatic shouting match. He worked the back channels. He convinced the board that Dorsey wasn't ready to lead. In a secret meeting, the board decided to demote Dorsey from CEO to a silent chairman role, a figurehead with no power. The press release was a masterpiece of corporate spin. It called the move a transition. But make no mistake, Dorsey was fired. He famously said getting fired from your own company is like being punched in the stomach. But unlike Jobs, Dorsey played the long game. He stayed on the board, quiet, watching, and waiting for his moment to return, which, as we know, he eventually did. Now, stop for a second. If you think these betrayals only happened in the old days of slow-moving business, you are making a massive mistake. The speed of modern coups is terrifying. We are about to look at the most chaotic 5 days in the history of artificial intelligence. But before we get to the OpenAI meltdown, we have to talk about the Chicago surprise that took down the most aggressive CEO in tech history. The year is 2017. Travis Kalanick is the king of Uber. He built the company on pure aggression, ignoring laws and crushing taxi unions. But that same aggression created a culture of scandal. Sexual harassment claims, intellectual property lawsuits, and a video of Kalanick arguing with his own Uber driver had poisoned the brand. The investors, specifically a firm called Benchmark Capital, had enough. They didn't call a meeting. They didn't send an email. 2 partners from the firm flew to Chicago, where Kalanick was interviewing executive candidates in a hotel room. They ambushed him. They handed him a letter titled, "Moving Uber Forward." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a demand for his immediate resignation, signed by 5 of the company's biggest investors. They told him he had hours to sign it, or they would release a public letter that would destroy his reputation forever. Cornered in a hotel suite, the man who fought city governments around the world finally folded. He signed the paper. These stories usually follow a pattern. The founder builds the castle, the board worries the founder is too wild, and the board locks the founder out. But in November 2023, the world witnessed a coup so bizarre, so rapid, and so public that it rewrote the playbook entirely. Imagine it's a Friday afternoon. Sam Altman, the face of the AI revolution and CEO of OpenAI, joins a Google Meet. Within minutes, the screen goes black. He's fired. No warning, no explanation given to the public other than he was not consistently candid. The tech world exploded. This wasn't a failing company. OpenAI was the hottest startup on the planet. The board, composed of members focused on AI safety, felt Altman was moving too fast, prioritizing speed over safety. They hit the nuclear button. But here is where this coup failed spectacularly. The board forgot who actually held the power. It wasn't the shares. OpenAI has a weird non-profit structure. It was the talent. Over the weekend, Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, OpenAI's biggest backer, was furious. He hadn't even been warned. He immediately offered to hire Altman and his entire team. Then, in a move never seen before, 700 of OpenAI's 770 employees signed a letter threatening to quit immediately unless the board resigned and reinstated Altman. It was a reverse coup. The employees held the company hostage. The board, realizing they would be governing an empty building with no engineers, collapsed. Within 5 days, Altman was back as CEO, and the board members who fired him were gone. It proved that in the modern economy, the assets walk out the door every evening, and if they don't come back, you don't have a company. We also have to touch on a different kind of coup, the Save Disney War. This wasn't a board firing a CEO. This was a family member going to war with a corporate dictator. In the early 2000s, Michael Eisner was the emperor of Disney. He had revitalized the company in the 90s, but by 2003, the magic was gone. Animation was failing, theme parks were dirty, and Pixar was threatening to walk away. Enter Roy E. Disney, the nephew of Walt Disney himself. Eisner made a fatal mistake. He underestimated the name on the building. He blocked Roy from the board, citing an age limit rule. Roy didn't go quietly. He launched a public campaign called Save Disney. He created a website, which was revolutionary at the time for a proxy fight, and urged shareholders to withhold their votes for Eisner. It was a civil war. At the 2004 shareholder meeting in Philadelphia, the result was shocking. 43% of shareholders withheld their votes for Eisner. In the corporate world, that is a vote of no confidence. It was a humiliation. Eisner was stripped of his chairmanship that night and stepped down as CEO a year later. The nephew had saved the uncle's legacy. So, what do all these stories tell us? We often look at business as a spreadsheet, numbers, profits, and losses. But when you peel back the layers, it's purely human. It's about ego, fear, and control. Steve Jobs lost Apple because he wouldn't compromise. Travis Kalanick lost Uber because his aggression became a liability. The OpenAI board lost because they didn't understand that a company is its people, not its bylaws. Every time you see a CEO suddenly step down to spend more time with family or pursue other interests, you should be suspicious. The polished press release is usually covering up a knife fight in the boardroom. I want to leave you with a question about the most famous of these cases. Looking back at 1985, Steve Jobs was chaotic and difficult, but the board claimed they were protecting the company's assets. In your opinion, was the Apple board actually justified in firing Steve Jobs in 1985, given how volatile he was? Or should a founder always have the right to lead their creation, no matter the cost? I'll be down in the comments reading your take on this. Thanks for watching.